And Roxanne, I am not going to read all the attendees. Were there any others that you can't identify?
No, I know who everyone else is, so I've got them. Thank you.
Okay, so this is a work session. I don't expect we'll go much over an hour, or we'll go maybe a little over an hour. Just want to clarify the meeting the other night that was a regular town council meeting. And Mr. Yeah, it'll come to me. Mr. Juskowitz, sorry, Steve. Mr. Juskowitz was there as an invited guest, as an invited chairman, as we do other chairmen throughout the year. So I think I probably confused everybody as to why I didn't allow it to turn into a discussion, but that was the reasoning, and that's why we moved forward for this meeting. So I threw down a few items for discussion, and what I would like to start with, because I'm confused about it, and I've heard Steve's info about punch lists. I've heard John Marshall's info about punch lists when he has shared his liaison position notes with us. And so can we talk about punch lists? Can we define what that means? Can we talk about warranty versus punch list? How long does this punch list last before we're finished? And Steve, let me let you start if you would. And then I'll move on to Mr. Donaldson.
All right, thank you, Linda. And just a couple of things. It's interesting because after we had this discussion, I went ahead and did a little bit of research on the internet about those terms that we used tonight. Punch list, non-conformance items, for example, warranty items, and when those things take over. Many of you have been involved probably in residential construction and things where you build a house. And when you build a house, before, a builder builds your house and you go to move in and you find problems, it could be doorknobs are missing, could be lighting missing screws in places, it could be things aren't lined up correctly, walls are crooked, could be a crack somewhere. And you make a list of those things, and you may accept the house, but there's a list of items that the builder agrees to come back and fix. Now, what makes this project a little bit different, and I'll address those terms here, is that it's a little bit different when your contracted construction is still going on while you're living in the house. And it gives you a lot longer of a period of time to notice things that aren't the way you want them to be or aren't the way they should be. So I want to address warranty items first. Warranty items are items where either the craftsmanship, the work, or in most cases, the equipment is guaranteed by the manufacturer to perform within standards for a certain period of time. So that could be it could be a year, it could be 10 years, depending on what it is. In the case of things like roofs, the roofer guarantees, if it's a 10-year roof, they guarantee 10 years that you're not going to have any leaks. Now, obviously, if the roof is damaged by a tree or something, that's different, but they guarantee that product for a certain period of time. So this project is a little bit different in a way that we don't sign the whole building over at one time. There are pieces and parts of the building that are turned over to us. And when work is complete and an area is done, and keep in mind there may be many, many trades involved, there is a series where that work is looked at by the construction manager. It is also has to be reviewed by the architect and accepted that it was built according to spec. Once that's been done, and the punch list is generally created by the architect who's reviewing it. So remember, the architect gets paid by us. They're not working for the construction manager. Their job, one of their jobs, is to ensure that the work is performed in accordance with their design and that the materials are the right materials and things like that. In some cases, it's a little bit more ominous because if you take something like that has to be sent off to a lab to be verified, that's a little bit different than some steel and things like that, or concrete that has to go to a lab for foundations. That's different than just someone looking at it. So there's different tests that are involved in those things. So in the case of the punch list, our punch list has grown and shrank over time because we've noticed more things that were not correct over time. Many of the things that are on that list are things that have failed, And because we're still under contract with ONG and they're sort of, I'm going to use the term in-house, those things are being addressed by ONG. If this work had been complete and we had built the school, let's say in a year, it was new construction, we came back out of it, and we were done with ONG, everything was all buttoned up and everything, we were just waiting a couple of years for a state audit, we would be contacting, in many cases, some of the vendors that provided the equipment because the stuff would be under warranty. So if it fails, they'll come back and fix it for a certain period of time. But keep in mind that we've been in some of these parts of these buildings for several years. So we noticed many of those problems. So today on what we call the punch list, and I just want to stop for a minute, the punch list was a living item until we do the last change order. And to give you an example, in the summer of 2019, actually it was late 2019, in 2020, we went out and did a major contract change in the Gallup Hill School to convert rooms into what we call safe rooms. And maybe that's not the professional term, but there's rooms that are designed so that when a student is placed in that room, there's nothing in there that they can hurt themselves with. They can be properly monitored by staff, and there's guidelines for how those rooms are constructed. They were not in the original plan in any way. I can't speak to exactly why they weren't in there, but they were asked for by the Board of Ed. The building committee, we knew that we could afford to put them in. They were a significant need because the rooms that were being used as safe rooms were being destroyed by the students. And we had to go back and repair all that damage, plus do the conversion of the safe rooms. That work was not complete until September of 2020. And there are still some punch list items remaining from that. And with COVID, things got a little bit difficult there. So those September 2020 punch list items would not have been on the list prior to that because that work was not complete. So I realize I kind of went in circles here, but punch lists are, you got a couple of things. When you turn over an area of the building that is substantially complete for use, and we accept that area is accepted, that means that there are no, quote, non-conformance items, big items that are a problem. Then the next piece of this is there would be items that are not correct or we don't accept, or the architect says, hey, that's not right. Something's missing, for example. Those are punch list items that are put on a list, and the trade, and in some cases, many trades have to come back and fix them. And sometimes it's not as simple as one trade, because you take, for example, if a ceiling leaks because you have a roof leak, that roof leak could leak on the ceiling tiles, which is another trade contractor. It could damage paint, that is another contractor. It could damage equipment if it leaks onto something electrical, in another. And while the work of those second and tertiary contractors is charged back to the roofer, the fact is that ONG still has to coordinate 4 trades to come in and do that. So the punch list item can grow that way as well. Today, and I'll talk to you in a couple of minutes about some of the items that are still on the punch list, which is, I almost want to say the work left to be complete. Because today, if a piece of equipment fails, and I'll just give you an example, we installed a tremendous $65 million project across 2 schools. We installed a tremendous amount of equipment, and if a piece of equipment fails, whether it's a fan, whether it is whatever it is, if it's still under warranty, and the warranty for that is on the parts that we put in, the equipment, that would be covered under the warranty for that equipment, but it's possible that the labor for that is not covered. We're kind of in a little bit of a gray zone with the Gallup Hill School because we haven't closed out the project with ONG yet. But after I take any questions that you have on what I just discussed, and one of the questions that Linda had at the end there was, when will this be over? The anticipation is right now is that by the end of April, that the items that are on the list, with the exception of a few items that require parts that may be longer to receive, that those items will all be cleared at that point. I was on the phone this morning. In fact, I was going to call Wayne, but I got tied up at work before this meeting with my day job. There are some things that we want to do up on the roof for access at the Gallup Hill School with the air conditioning up there that aren't on any list, but they're items that the school wants to make their maintenance a little bit safer on the roof. There's some ladders to they're really kind of like a stairwell thing to walk over the air conditioning that were not in the original design. We're looking at some specs for that, but that's not on any list right now, but it's still something that the school feels they need. So little things like that that could be handled outside the main O&G contract may continue for a while. But right now, O&G is working to close out everything left on the lists that are distributing as the punch list by the end of April. But there may still be issues with equipment that fails that may take longer than that, depending on the vendor. And the last thing I want to say before I answer anything back on that is to put things in perspective for everyone that's on this call. And I know those of you that have been with the building committee for a while understand this. The process for building in the state of Connecticut is very, very clear. The guidelines come out of Connecticut state statutes. Every single trade contract that we awarded during this project for both schools is awarded to the lowest responsible bidder. That means we give it to the lowest bidder that met the minimum standard for performance. When you combine that with the fact that we went into this project with a very, very tight budget, some of the equipment that was spec'd for the schools had to fit within that budget. And the architect's job was to design a building that fit within the budget. And granted, we were working toward a budget that was recommended to us by the architect at the beginning, and some time delays caused escalation of things. You start out with a building that was very, very tight budget, and then you award everything to the lowest bidder. There will be some things that are going to fail earlier than if you had spent another $20 million and bought all higher end equipment when you did the bid. So keep that in mind as you look at these projects. In my presentation, I did talk about total cost per square foot and total cost per student. We did this about 40% cheaper than a lot of other districts. A lot of it was due to good management and holding the construction manager at risk, O&G, to their guaranteed maximum price for things. And I believe that when it comes to cost control, they did an exceptionally good job. If you look at our change order percentages for non-owner asked for change orders, it was well below the state average, despite the two things I told you about. So with that, I'll answer any questions about what I just brought up before I get into any specific punch list items. Thank you.
Mr. Donaldson, do you have anything to add? And may I ask the question, how many dollars are we talking here in punch list items? And at what point are we taking too much time before we can go ahead and start applying for the audit, or whatever the correct word is, delaying that because of punch list items? That's why I think, to me, the dollar is more important than the number of items. If somebody can help me with that.
I don't have a specific on the number. That changes depending on how much goes off and is completed and if other stuff comes on. Steve, you have pretty good summation of the difference between the two. A lot of the items that I consider punch list were items that, if they had failed into this after we had taken possession of the building, would probably fall under warranty. But since these were documented in like June of 2019, 3 or 4 months prior to, and even when Sam was here, some of this was documented there. I think they're punch list items and should have been corrected before, under that instead of under a warranty item. And we also haven't received any of the documentation on Gallup Hill, so we have no information on the warranties, the lengths of time, or who to contact and who the vendors were if we do have a warranty issue.
Let me address the dollar figures, and thanks, Wayne.
Yep.
Let me address the dollar figures on that, and some of those on the as-built with the last changes to the air conditioning. I know that some of the stuff that is still owed to you in the Gallup Hill School is had recent changes to it with the HVAC system changes, so I know that affects some of that. As of today, I got an update from O&G today, so this is probably even newer than what just went to Wayne recently. And this had 18 items left on it, many of which were ceiling tiles. There was some paint in some places. Some of them are, there's some damaged carpet and things that it was approximately $16,000 in items at the Ledyard Middle School. Now, keep in mind that we've paid the final bill on that and working with Board of Ed now to get that project closed out with the ED 49 forms. Those are actually submitted by the Board of Ed, not by the building committee. But just to let you know, as of today, O&G is still holding $70,000 of money that goes out to those trades specific to those punch list items that are only valued at about $16,000. So while the thought process to the building committee, and if you go back and look at our minutes, you'll see that we decided closing out the contract with O&G, giving them the money, and so that we paid the final bill, because we can't submit anything to the state to close out. So we pay the final bill to O&G, and then let O&G work with the trades to finish up that using a little leverage on those trades. Because the contracts are not with the town. All those individual trade contracts are held by O&G under a CMR relationship. And what that does is it actually legally allows O&G to withhold payments on the same contractor that's building the Groton schools, believe it or not, by not paying them for work on that till they finish the work on the Ledyard School. So that may sound crazy, but it's legal because both contracts are with O&G in a CMR relationship. So and just to put dollar figures, in Gallup Hill School, there's about $20,000 of punch list items. We still have about $300,000 of payment we have not made to O&G on the Gallup Hill School. Not because they haven't done the work. It's just that O&G hasn't given us the final bill. I was supposed to have a building committee meeting next week. Unfortunately, I'm going to be out of town, and I've asked to reschedule that a week to the right to a special meeting. I expect that about $250,000 of that will be in that next bill we get from them. And then about 2 weeks later, we're going to get the final bill from O&G. But they have to go back and verify every single, the stack of invoicing related to that school. If you stacked it up inside your house on the floor, it would hit your ceiling. So it's a pretty big stack of paperwork there for them to validate before we get the final bill. I expect to get that in probably in the first week of May, so we can get that project closed out. As of this morning, there are, and I'll talk about door closers in a minute, there are 29 miscellaneous items on the punch list that were not related to that safe room work we did, 6 more related to the safe room, and then there were 28 items that are the same exact item that are door closers. My understanding is that Assa Abele, which are the people that build that door closer, apparently that door closer had problems because they redesigned it, is my understanding, with a more robust design. And they are providing the more robust design to Ledyard for our door closers within the warranty of the door closer. However, those door closers, we're going to pay the labor to have them installed, but they're the actual door, because the trade that installs it installed the design spec door closer. It was designed correct. It was installed correctly. The problem is it kept failing. So the manufacturer provides us with a new part. We get a more robust, better design at no cost to us in that particular case. But that's what's left in the Gallup Hill School. Some of them are nuisance items, and other items are significant items that need to be addressed. And getting that trade out for a couple of $100 worth of work is sometimes very, very difficult. Back to Linda's comment, I believe we are past the point where not closing out the contracts, it costs us more not to close out than it does to deal with some of these pesky items. And in some cases, Wayne's team has just gone to fix things because it was just easier for them to fix something simple. The time it takes Wayne to chase that down and have somebody come look at it takes longer than for his team just to fix something that's simple. And in again, we've been in those buildings for a long time, so we have an opportunity to notice a lot more things. Keeping in mind that in a $65 million project, 1/10 of 1%, we're under the 1/10 of 1% here on these punch list items.
Okay, does anybody have any questions? I've asked all the questions. Does anyone, Mr. Washington, you need to unmute yourself.
Just moving my mouth for a moment there. The quick question I have, you mentioned that, Steve, that O&G is holding on to $70,000 for about $16,000 worth of remaining work. We have about $300,000 that's going to be due to O&G. So my question is, and having done a lot of facility jobs, and I'll be blunt, I've done a bunch of jobs. There's $16 million, $20 million, and I would bet my paycheck that as soon as they tell me I got a facility job, it's going a year over. I can just guarantee it, because when they start putting all the pieces together, it just goes south really quick. and they're so interconnected that one thing goes off, it just starts pushing the schedule and you can't get a hold of it again. It takes a lot of effort. But my point would be, as far as a cost carrying portion for the interest and everything, we've got $16,000 roughly, or $20,000 of remaining work. And it's costing us $60,000 a month to carry the note without closing it.
60,000 is actually, I was told by Marcia, that number is a little bit higher. It's a little bit lower than that actually, because remember, part of the project's already bonded and everything like that. So it's a little bit less than that. But keep in mind that the number you have to actually look at is the portion that's not, you have to do a calculation on the state reimbursement. On the $16,000 to $20,000 worth of items in one school and under much smaller amount in the other school, we've already gone to the point of moving to close out. And I'll talk about some of the preps the building committee needs to take to get us quicker to close out. But the fact of the matter is that we're going to carry costs all the way until state reimbursement, which we can do things to try to make that happen faster on our side, in that we are 100% ready for audit, and that when we shove everything in front of the state and it's all the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed, everything is indexed in a nice stack for the state to make it super easy so we don't have to answer any questions and we don't have to give them anything. That's the best way that we can go. I did ask both ONG and Silver Petroselli to give me some feedback on projects that were complete in the last 6 years on the state list, and when the final approval was on their items. And they owe me that answer back. They said that anecdotally, they like to say 3 to 4 years. However, the interesting thing is that when the state money is all the state money, you go up into some of the schools where it's 90 or 100% reimbursement, it's all state money. So they take as long as they want to do on those projects because the state runs them anyway. If you take a project like the new Grasso Tech School, that was 100% state funded. So it's not like there's any town money in those things. But Councilor Washington, I understand your question. I agree with you. At this point here, we submit our ED-49 form. Actually, when I say we, the school board actually submits that form. We're ready to do that for Ledyard Middle School, and I hope to do that very, very soon for Gallup Hill School as well. And I know that I think that's Superintendent's hand that's up there.
We have a couple of people that have questions, so I'll move.
I hope I answered your question as long as I can say.
Thank you.
Superintendent Hartling.
Hey, good evening, Superintendent Hartling. I just need to stop us for a second because what I want to remind everyone is today is March 31st, 2021. In April, May of 2019, these buildings were essentially done and ready to come over to the Board of Education. We floundered all summer long until we forced a ribbon cutting. And thanks to our fire marshal, we're able to leverage some additional work leverage the fire marshal to get the contractor to do additional work. We were able to take temporary occupancy of the buildings in 2019. It is 2021, and we are discovering that our construction manager at risk. There are air conditioning systems that were not working appropriately at Gallup Hill School for the last 3 years. And what do we find out? That they were commissioned, missing all sorts of components that affected their ability to heat and cool rooms appropriately. The excuses on that were, well, just let's not have thermostats in the rooms that heat and cool rooms appropriately. We found out that the middle school does not have the appropriate radon system. And they come back and fix that. ONG, as your construction manager at risk, we're now talking 2 years of quote unquote closeout, and things have morphed from, or to Wayne's point, morphed from punch list items to warranty items because we've dragged the clock. I'll just also remind everyone that the mayor was kind enough one morning to give us a call when a load of cement sat for hours prior to being poured. We're still waiting on load tickets to verify that the concrete sidewalks that are chipping at our buildings weren't poured after the load had expired. There's a lot of things going on here. And what happens is we get caught up in door closures rather than the big serious items relative to the construction manager at risk monitoring the contracts or the contractor's work that was done in these buildings. That's the real crux of this. And when we've identified issues, it's taken months, well, in some cases, years to rectify it. And that's the situation we're in, where Wayne is chasing the contractors or chasing our construction manager at risk to get these projects finished, right? And we're playing this game, well, and I don't want to use incorrect terms of playing the game, but we're bouncing between committee work and what needs to happen. The schools, we've dealt with issue after issue, and it goes into a swirl when it gets to O&G. And you know, again, they pulled their supervisor or their superintendent off the projects back in 2019. We went to one superintendent. They've had turnover. You know, this has not been guided through over the last 2 years in an acceptable manner. And I think the town has been paying carrying costs that weren't necessary had they stepped up and done what needed to be done. We shouldn't be finding out in 2021 that components were not even installed, even though they went through the certification process. So there's a lot more to this than simply looking at a punch list of value at this point. We continue to find things that are flat out missing from the original design, which has created, you know, years of consternation with my staff not having rooms that are at acceptable temperatures. So, you know, if the town wishes to close these projects out, go for it. But I'm just telling you that, you know, what we've been working through, and I actually asked Mr. Kilpatrick to join this call because I think there's been some subterfuge with this idea between Sam and Wayne, something got dropped. Sam's been in this, he was having the same battles back in 2018 with quality of work, with what was happening related to these projects. And so if we want to hang our hat on, they didn't have a lot of change orders and a cost per square foot, so be it. That's fair, because I think Mr. Juskowitz is absolutely correct in those status. But the way in which this has been handled and managed has not necessarily met my expectations, and I question the quality of what we have after that $68 million. So that's what I needed to say, and I know Wayne has a lot more specificity around particular components that weren't even installed into our buildings, even though they were on the spec sheet and were critical to the functioning. Heck, we could still talk about the wet head in the lobby of Gallup Hill, which has been a discussion of our fire marshal since 2018, in the fall of 2018 or the winter of 2018. So I'll stop there because my blood pressure is getting a little bit elevated, but it's beyond frustrating as the Board of Education to be balancing through this. And what ends up happening is, you know, Wayne's pushing that because he understands the implications to maintenance going on the long term. And yes, we have been fixing things because, quite frankly, my teachers needed to be fixed. And so, you know, the excuse making is troublesome, particularly when you're paying millions of dollars to a construction manager at risk to own these things for the town and look out for your best interest.
So Mr. Russick has a question, and then Mr. Washington, your hand is raised, but let me move to Mr. Russick. Mr. Russick, are you on the building committee?
Yes, so I'm the chairman for the Board of Ed Facilities Committee.
Okay, you're not on PMBC, correct?
That's correct, I am not.
Okay.
So Mr. Hartling politely talked about a couple of the issues that I wanted to bring up, so I don't need to rehash those. I'll start with a question and then I'll just maybe give a little bit of an overview as to what it is my concern is. And for those people who don't know me, I'll just introduce my interest in this. So I'm a member of the Board of Education. I'm the committee chair for facilities. I have a wife who teaches at the high school, and I have two sons who still attend the high school. And I live in Ledyard, and I lived in Gales Ferry before that. So as a taxpayer, as a member of the Board of Education, with an employee and students at the school, I clearly have a vested interest in the project. My question is, and I'll get to why I asked this in a second, after listening to Mr. Hartling talk, I don't know what it is we can do to push O&G to actually finish the project. And I understand what Mr. Juskowitz said, and I appreciate all the information, and I'm definitely sensitive to the necessity to close out the projects in order to bond the money and stop the bleeding. But there's a sort of this dilemma for me, this disconnect. So I work at Electric Boat. I test the electric plant on a submarine, and I can't imagine delivering a product in some of the manner that the O&G delivered to us, the ventilation system in particular, where tests were signed off for things that weren't installed. So just to reiterate my question after saying all that is, what is it that we can do from either from the Board of Ed, from the PMBC, or from the town of Ledyard in order to sort of ensure that O&G does the job that we expect them to do by contract, and when we close it out, to use your words, Steve, that they agree to fix things that need to be fixed. Thank you.
All right, I guess I'll address that a couple of ways. Number one, in the comparisons with Electric Boat, having served on 2 new construction ships that left there, I think that you're making that we don't want to make those comparisons, because the fact of the matter is that, and I'll just give you an example here. On the air conditioning system in the Gallup Hill School, there are thousands and thousands of components in that system that are installed. I'm not making excuses for them, but what I am saying is that there may be additional problems in that system that are there that we will never know about and will never affect the system. Who knows? There are literally thousands and thousands of electrical, electronic connectors, elbows, ducting in that system. And I'll let Mr. Washington talk about construction projects as a professional in the field, but there is likelihood, there are likely other things in that building with millions of components that were not installed correctly or installed backwards. And while everything is checked by the architects, the fact is every single screw is not. Nor is it in every submarine that comes out, because I found problems in those ships that were built when I served on them. So we find those problems and we move forward. The number of how the thermostat system design works in different rooms is a function of design. Did I personally review the electrical design of the HVAC system? No, and nor would any other chair of any building committee. However, I will say this, it needs to perform to the standard. What we can do to O&G, the main thing we have for O&G here is, sure, we still owe O&G some money, but keep in mind that most of the money we owe O&G actually goes to the trades that do the work. So you have to keep kind of that in mind here. Most of the money we still owe them. The biggest thing that we have with O&G is that it's the recommendations and that we send back on, if I receive something, first of all, the superintendent receives a phone call from another school district saying, hey, we're getting ready to do some work. You had O&G, how are your buildings? And the reason I say that those kind of calls happen is because when we were reviewing architects, we were reviewing, whether it's commissioning agents or whoever else we were reviewing, that all of those organizations, as we made phone calls, and in fact, Sam Kilpatrick made those phone calls to other districts and asked those facilities managers for recommendations on the organizations that we were going to deal with. That was before Wayne's time. That's why Sam made those calls. But I anticipate that those types of calls are being made. And when those calls are made, those individuals will speak their mind. And that is really the biggest thing that we have in these particular cases. But I can assure everyone on this call that there are probably other defects in those buildings that we do not know about. And we will maybe never know about them. And the same thing for any other building project, because you only can inspect so much to so often. And
I'm sorry, Steve, if I may. To be fair, though, Gallup Hill School, the heating system in a section of that building has not worked appropriate in 2 years. We literally, Wayne has spent more than 150 to 200 man hours just chasing down why rooms are at 50, 60 degrees and some rooms are at 80. So at a time when you have identified clear issues, we're chasing ghosts, and then to find out there's components that aren't even in the system. That's not a, making sure every screw. That's a fundamental problem with the system because it was not installed appropriately and nobody checked. And when it was certified, I questioned that as well. It was certified that all of those rooms that it was built appropriately. Clearly that wasn't the case. That's what I'm talking about. So this like, yeah, there's going to be issues. Absolutely. But the reality is that there were identified issues. We were chasing our tail, and I was putting space heaters in individual rooms just so I had a temperature acceptable for children to be in that room for over a year. That's not a good quality of care.
And Superintendent, I hear what you say, and I will speak to this on that, is in every single one of those particular cases, when it comes to that section of the building, and I see all those emails back and forth, I do know that Johnson Controls, Action Air, and O&G continued to work that problem throughout that whole time. Every time they thought they had it fixed, going the right direction, it didn't. And the two dampers that were not installed that we're talking about here in particular, as the thread was pulled on that, what we found out was that when the installation was being done, they physically couldn't be installed there. And as all of the trades are working with that, they thought that they could balance around that. Now, we didn't know that until much later, and the architect was not informed of that at the time. There's no excuse for that, but in that particular case, they continue to work on the problem. And I'm going back to Mr. Russick's question, is what we can do at this point to move forward. And that is to get that area closed out. And that section of the building, there was something definitely wrong there. I asked for some very specific special meetings to be held just on that, brought additional people together to specifically address that problem. And my answer to them was very simple. I don't care if you have to go hand over hand to that entire system, something is not right. And I put my own experience on it and said, this is not the way we should be troubleshooting. There's something physically wrong. We brought the engineer back in who had designed the system, and his goal was to prove that he didn't design a bad system. And he was the one who actually came out and said, this is supposed to work. There's something wrong here. And that was what led to finding those particular problems that we had to work through. So I'm not making any excuses for anything. In this particular case, there were things that were not detected. And again, if we had closed this whole thing out a year ago, with the exception of air conditioning, like I said, we'd be dealing with the problem from a different perspective, I would think. But the carrying costs on this, we haven't incurred a single dollar of extra carrying costs yet. It's when the state audit occurs at the end that we would see those extra costs, as opposed to now.
To me, okay. A couple quick questions. One is, so I'm listening to this and going back to dealing with a lot of buildings and issues, and not going to call it any contractor. I mean, construction firm, construction administrator, whatever they want to call themselves. I have two questions. One is, what do we do with latent defects? This heating issue is a latent defect. It's an unknown defect that the owner wouldn't know of. The person who should have known about it would have been O&G. Okay, so I'm really tossed about I'll be blunt, giving a nickel. If this was a state job, I'll tell you what I would do. I wouldn't pass the nickel on to the contractor, but the problem is, goes right to back what you said, Steve, is that O&G, I don't know, do they have any skin in the game at this point? There's $370,000 hanging out there. And how much is that to O&G? Is it 5,000, 10,000? Is it all going to their subs? So O&G has no driving reason to move this ball unless they've got some skin in the game. And part of this, the real thing here is kind of a learning thing. Big jobs, $65 million, independent inspection firm, period, in my opinion, period. Because I'm not gonna say anything, I don't know who the architect is, don't need to. I know it's O&G, doesn't make a difference who the contractor is, but having done so many jobs, when I've come into problems where there's a problem in my facilities, what ends up happening is the department, the state of Connecticut, ends up eating the cost, because a lot of times trying to get the architect to admit they got a problem and the contractor admit they messed up, somehow the DOT ends up eating money. And in this case, I'm trying to figure out, because the horse has left the barn. at this point, the cost to fix this stuff, and I know Superintendent Hartling may not want to hear this, but at some point we're going to reach a point where it's going to be more advantageous for us to pay the cost to fix it if we get to the point where we got to start spending money out of pocket just to do a carrying cost. But is there anything available to force O&G to do what they were paid to do? Because that's really the crux of the matter. Because unless you get O&G to come back to the table and address these things, and meaning coming back and saying, you know what, yeah, there's $70,000 held out for this guy, whatever, we're gonna back charge them. They could do that now. They could do that now if they chose to. Okay, because if we're 2 years behind on the project, and you got to put aside the stuff that if we've done change orders, those change orders have impacted work along the way. So when you look at that 2019 completion date, it doesn't mean anything if we start stuffing stuff in there for change orders, because that slides the scale. So the real question is, when there was a job supposed to be done, a little side note here, job supposed to be done in 2019, our addition of work caused a delay in the work, pushes out to 2020. Okay, so now we're in 2021. We got a small list of things to do. And the real question becomes, what can we physically do to force O&G, to force the people to come back, or somebody to fix this? Because we'll be here next year. We will be here next year still. This heating stuff, that's a latent defect. You know, I'd be saying, you know what, rip it out. You know, summer comes, rip it all out, rebuild it. Yeah, because the issue is we paid for a product, we didn't get the product. That's all I need to know. And the problem is, you got to, whoever certified the system, what happens to those individuals? Because somebody should have gone through an air exchange, a heat test, all those things should have taken place to certify the system. You certify it during the spring, you certify it during the fall, so you see what happens in the winter, you see what happens when you get the AC running to see if it actually works. You know, granted, the balancing is always horrendous. You know, not making any excuses for that portion of it, but unless there's something to force O&G to address these issues timely, we will be here next year still.
Yeah.
I'm done.
I'm trying to figure out how to put my, if my hand is up, how to put that down. I will state on your comment about an independent inspector, for the case of the HVAC system, we did hire a commissioning agent. The commissioning agent was involved in that and certified that system when it was done. So we did pay for a third party on that particular one. But as far as holding, you know, you have to ask yourself on some of these things is, I want to go back April 2019. Let's keep in mind, substantial completion and project completion are two totally different things. Realistically, the schedules we were working with at the beginning were for the many months after that. So we're not talking 2 full years here or anything like that. Keep those things in mind. And I'll tell you something right now, the biggest thing we have at O&G is their reputation or lack of reputation moving forward. There's not a lot of dollar value here for these items. In fact, O&G gets to a point where they have to decide, do they just want to self-perform on the item, right? And but you have to keep in mind that all the state paperwork is all based on billing that they're paying their subcontractors for. And part of this is the state contract mess, because they certify they're going to pay the contractors to do the work. They bill us for the work. And changes to that can screw up all of our submissions to the state. If we were funding this completely within the town, we wouldn't have to worry about any of that kind of stuff. But we have to meet all these state requirements for submitting all the paperwork as well. So yeah, we can hold some of that. The other thing I want to point out is all the work that's been done over that whole year of chasing the air conditioning problems by Action Air and their subcontractor Johnson Controls that does the heating and cooling system, which is super complicated, by the way, all computer controlled everywhere. And why? Because the state requires us to build the buildings to be these high efficiency buildings that is super a million times more complicated than it really needs to be to meet some state guideline. But as you said, we paid for that to be built. It was designed, and retrofitting that air conditioning into the Gallup Hill School was a nightmare of a project to do. Looking back on it, I almost wish we didn't put air conditioning in because it was very complicated because of the ceiling heights that were involved. And that's what drove this damper problem, by the way. But it doesn't change the
They
fact
didn't
that
put the damper in, Steve? Like,
it couldn't fit in there. They had to do something different
but
to get it
okay,
in.
if I'm building it and I can't fit the damper in and it's a fundamental piece of the design, I just leave it out And,
Nope, that's not exactly what happened. What happened at the time was they discussed that with the balancers and Johnson Controls about that the system could perform, but they failed to inform the right people. I'm not saying it's the right answer. I'm just telling you what happened. And they felt that they could balance their way to take care of that airflow problem, and they couldn't. And they had to go back and fix that. So this is kind of one of those things that if you go back to the police station project, we had a humidity problem for 6 months trying to chase that down with adjusting settings. And in the end, we put in $14,000 worth of reheaters and solved the problem, and it took care of that problem. So sometimes designs don't always work the way you expect them to. And when you're dealing with a 50, 60-year-old building, it gets a little more complicated. I'm not making any excuses for O&G. I am not happy with the way they performed on this particular project, but we have to work through them working through their primes and their subcontractors to make sure that we do the things correctly here and try to get these projects closed out. We are clearly, in my opinion, 8 months to a year behind where we should have been on this right now. And part of that is COVID, a little bit, not a whole lot, but part of it's COVID. But we need to move to close these out. O&G has said they anticipate having just about everything done by the end of April. And I'd like to see them accomplish that so we can move on with this. But the other thing to keep in mind is that the review of whether to have a whole nother body reviewing this work, I don't think if we'd had hired a clerk of the works, and we've talked about this before, they would have noted that latent defect because they would not have checked every screw in everything in the entire project.
Steve, I'm going to interrupt you on that because I have in our agenda that a future meeting will be about what went wrong, what we can fix, post-audit, lessons learned. But I want to do that after the audit. We got to get to the audit. We got to get to the audit. Fred, you had something, you had your hand up next, and then Anthony.
Yeah, thank you. So I think, Steve, we're not at the point where we can continue to be nice guys for this job. I'm at the point where I think we should be calling bonds on this job. Here's the reality. The schools have been empty since April of last year. So they've had almost an entire year without kids in schools that work could have been done. And instead we're further behind, which doesn't make any sense to me. I'm hugely concerned about this. I'm at the point now where, as chairman of the COG, I want to go to my next COG meeting with the 21 other towns and talk to them about how O&G did a gross disservice to the town of Ledyard with $65 million. I'm very, very dissatisfied, and I'm ready to start talking about it. And I think that's where we need to go. And if we need to bring an attorney in to go there, that's what we need to do. But it has to change. It keeps dragging on. And I just wanted to add one thing about the clerk of the works thing, which, we had a clerk of the works with the police department. We've had nonstop HVAC issues. We had sewer pump ejector issues, and we actually had a sewer line that had a negative slope. So we paid somebody to do the job, and it didn't really happen there either. So not that that's the solution in the future. I don't really know what the solution in the future is. But I would say we cannot continue to just be nice with these contractors. We have to be ready to play hardball, and I think we need to do that now. And if it means calling bonds, that's what we do.
Thank you, Mayor. The thing I just want to add is that the maximum amount of in bonds and things, the dollar values we're talking about here don't warrant legal things because the most that we can go back is for the things that weren't done. So the fact is, the number one thing that we can hold on O&G is recommendations or lack of recommendations for future work as they close out these last of the projects, because there's just not enough, what's the word I'm looking for? There's just not enough money, dollar value of work out there to make that worthwhile in the case. And by the time we got to that, I think these things are going to be largely cleared. And
Steve, in some cases, I'm more concerned about willful neglect of the contractors that said that they installed things, that certified they installed things, and they didn't. And that's a different story. Willful neglect is not just, oh, it's not working, we're going to make it right. So I'm not on the same page with you on that.
Understand.
Mr. Psalms. Whoops. Bill.
I think Anthony was next, wasn't he?
Oh, I'm sorry, Anthony, yes, and then Bill.
I was going to hang up now. No, so I appreciate the mayor's comments, because that's kind of where I was going at. And I know Chairman Davis and Mayor, we've discussed through leadership discussions in the past, at what point do we memorialize the punch list items and some of the wrongful neglect items and leverage the town's attorney to pursue this through a different angle to see if that has more teeth to go down that path? Because I think everyone's asking the same question is, what can we do to hold them accountable? And the dollars that still remain outstanding is minimal, but I know we continue through many discussions talk about these punch list items, and the punch list is long. And one of the questions that I know others have raised and I have raised as well is, at what point do some of these punch list items and items that continue to come up, are they truly punch list items? Are they warranty items? Or at what point do they become an issue that then the district and the town ultimately own financially to resolve, when the reality is they were never done right to begin with? So should they really be items that we fund the cost for? So somewhat of a comment and then question whether or not we have the ability at this point to pull in the town's attorney and pursue this through a different angle.
Thank you, Anthony. Mr. Psalms, Bill.
So thank you, and that's kind of where I'm going. But I'm going to start with a couple of other things. We've spent a lot of time talking about very complex systems going wrong. We've talked about maybe not having the most expensive things, which is maybe why they went wrong. But what bothers me when I read this punch list is the simpler things. Roofs shouldn't leak when you're putting a brand new roof on a newly reconstructed building. And if they do, you fix them right away. You don't let the gym floor soak and curl up the expensive floor. You've got in both buildings in the punch list, or whatever we're calling it, you've got multiple issues of roof leak damage and then not fixing it. Roof leaks lead to much worse things. They lead to decay of the building structure. They lead to paint and surface issues, and they lead to black mold. So roof is a very simple, yes, they're complex, but compared to an HVAC system, it's a simple problem. It leaks, you fix it. That's a major fault, and I think that's a failure in workmanship or materials used or competency, but it's not a complex system. Other things, I see paint issues throughout both buildings. When paint bubbles on a brand new surface and all you do is scrape it off and repaint it, that's not the answer. You have to look at whether that paint was compatible with the surface that was painted on. Is it stainless steel? Is it galvanized steel? Those things shed their paint right away. Sometimes it's the paint. Sometimes it's the paint not getting along with the paint if there was already paint on that surface. But that's really simple stuff. But what speaks to me more than those two simple things is that hard hat. It says to me as a taxpayer and a resident, as a resident and as a manager of projects myself, there's something wrong with the way O&G managed this project. So I went out and I Googled O&G and school projects. And if you do it yourself, you'll find that not all is well with O&G in Connecticut and the world of schools. So I'm with Fred and I'm with Anthony. I think that, fooling around with holding back $16,000 or $300,000 on a $65 million project, nothing happens till you get a lawyer. And I learned that a long time ago. I spent $25 to have a lawyer write to the city of New London because the city was ignoring me. And guess what? I had a phone call that day. So O&G is going to listen to a lawyer. Yeah, they want us to say good things about them, but they know we're not going to. So what are they going to do differently now? Nothing. I think that we should look into not only a lawyer, but we should talk to other school systems. And, lawyers love class actions. That's when you get people's attention. So in my mind, that's something I think, at least as a suggestion, we should look into, because we're not going to see anything change. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Anyone else have any comments? I would just add to Bill just said, and that is, we're not going to give them a good recommendation. So I don't think that matters anymore. I mean, I can't imagine the superintendent, the PMBC, the Board of Ed, the town council, the mayor, anybody here would give them a good reputation. So I don't think we can hold that anymore. We're well past that, in my opinion. So let's see. I see Kate. Kate.
Thank you. So I just wanted to add that as a member of the PMBC, I know that we have had many, many examples of us asking for progress on these items. I myself have tried in different instances to push for an estimated completion date. What is your plan to fix these items? The doors come to mind. We were talking about doors in the Gallup Hill cafeteria before COVID, talking about the fact that these doors were just going on. And my line of questioning was about what is your plan to fix this and when is it going to be fixed? And we never seem to get to a straight answer with that. So at this point, if we decide that these items are overcome by events and it just makes more sense for us to fix them ourselves, I understand that decision-making process, but how do we hold them accountable? Are we left holding the bag financially? If these items end up needing attention further on down the line, it's just going to continue to be the town of Ledyard paying for that through the Board of Ed budget. And I don't know what the recourse is there. So I'd like to understand how that works.
Yeah, and Katie has been on except for a brief period while she wasn't. She's been on the committee for a long time, and I want to emphasize something here that I'm as frustrated as many on this, but short of, you have to keep in mind that with legal action, you have to have specific things. You have to come out with very specific items that you're asking for them to address or failure to do. You can't make general statements because you have to be specific. And in this particular case, in the case of there's a lot of moving parts here with respect to the different contracts and things like that. Our holding back of not paying O&G for things, something to keep in these particular. There are some particular things that, as we prepare for audit, that I'm looking for that are, I hate to use the word chargebacks, but where we can go back, where we have incurred additional cost that we could try to go back to O&G and ask for funds against. And that's one of the goals I want to try to have here, because the fact of the matter is that and I want to give you an example, whether it's a door or whether it's a stair tread or whether it's whatever it may be, a window that may leak, that if the contractor installs a piece of equipment per the design and it later fails, or they have to repair that item, but general dissatisfaction is to my knowledge not something that we can do. And our committee's been on this project for over 4 years from inception, maybe 5 years. And I do want to take a minute while we're here being recorded and while we're doing this to thank the PMBC for their volunteer effort, because everybody on the PMBC is a volunteer, like most of you that are on this call. There's a few of you that are doing this as part of your day job, but it's an awful lot of time and an awful lot of effort's been put into this. As Linda said, we'll look at ways of doing a future project better in the future. But I don't believe that the fact of the matter is O&G has failed to get contractors to finish work that need to be done. And in some cases, between the architect, the secondary inspectors, and or the CMR, defects were not detected that should have been.
Thank you. Wayne has his hand up.
Thank you. Just to go back to Bill Som's issue with the hard hat. During our last inspection that I did with O&G, their project manager that was on that admitted that he was the one that glued that hat up there. So it's a project manager that's creating some of these issues that we're now trying to deal with. My biggest fear right now on these projects, especially Gallup Hill, is the fact that we have not had it either a heating or cooling season without problems in the HVA system. And we've got at least another year or close to a year to go before we're going to get a good heating season under our belt to see if what changes they've made now are going to actually work and we're going to be I don't want to say home free, but buildings that we can operate with reasonable temperatures in the classrooms.
Thank you. Let's see, I saw another hand. No, Mr. Washington, did you put your hand down?
Actually, I have a question, and this is, so I'm still trying to wrap my head around O&G here, construction. So Steve, what exactly was their job? Were they just a pass through for a check? What was their task? And one other, hold on, before you answer that one other question is going to follow that. When we talk about the issue with the air handling system and the comment about the not being able to put something within the, I guess the damper doesn't fit because of the design. Is there any chargeback that goes back to the architect who designed it?
When you say chargeback, the design, it turns out, was adequate. When chasing this down, the additional costs that we have seen for where the architect came back in, there were some additional costs that the architect did reviews to prove their system was right. I anticipate that that charge going back to, in this case, Action Air through O&G. But as far as the two manual dampers that were not installed, they're installed now. They found a way to put them in a different way to get them in there. And I just found out recently that that had been in the last, since we had our meeting with the town council, that was in fact known to the commissioning agent prior when the installation was being done, that they were not there. I found that out only recently. And it was not reported back to the architect, and it should have been.
Okay.
So, you think about all that air conditioning stuff tucked up into a tiny space up in the ceiling. Every single component is not going to be individually checked. And if they were missing, they should have came out in balancing. In fact, it turns out we found that in balancing, that they can never balance those very, very well. I understand Wayne's concerns as well there, because as they make changes to the programming for all that stuff based on all of the, there are so many moving parts in that air conditioning system between thermostats and dampers that are remotely controlled, airflow. It's a very, very complicated system. And every time you make changes to it, you don't know how that's going to affect you for a long time until you have the conditions again. So that is a difficult situation. So back to what O&G, as a construction manager at risk, and I went back and I looked at the notes we had from when we were given a presentation back 4 or 5 years ago on the different types of, in the police station, we had a general contractor responsible for everything. We only paid one bill to them. There's CM construction managers, and there's construction managers at risk. And all of the documentation, I went back, took a look at it today, is that the construction manager at risk is an owner advocate and manages the project with the owner's best interest in mind at all times. Now, we can make arguments that they did not do that. And when they say they were at risk, they are at risk to deliver the building within the guaranteed maximum price, even if they lose money.
Yep.
So that's what we paid for, was that a guaranteed maximum price. And they are our advocate. And like I said, they did a great job on cost control. However, the fact of the matter is that there are areas that there are some defects in the buildings that should have been detected or better managed at their resolution, because some of them are relatively easy fixes. They could have been much better managed for resolution. My dissatisfaction with O&G is primarily in how they have handled the last 14 months more than anything else.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Yes, Mr. Song.
So Steve, I just want to comment that it may feel like it, but we don't intend to be picking on the PMBC. We know that you guys felt the majority of the pain here with your hours and hours and hours and hours and years of meetings. But I want to reiterate that I think the only way we're going to get a response out of O&G is a lawsuit. And I want to add to that the state paid 62% of the $65 million. So I think the state should be a party to this. And I also think that our punch list and our years of keeping a punch list and the PMBC meeting minutes and all of the correspondence that went back and forth between the town, the school, the PMBC, and ONG is a very specific record. It's not general complaints. It's extreme. I mean, screws, identifying screws in door plates. That's pretty specific. And what I'm seeing is a pattern. And if the state is a party to this and they see a pattern in other schools, that's pretty bad news for ONG. And if they don't see a pattern, then maybe it's us. And okay, so we just got a bad deal. But if there's a pattern, this is a big deal. So I think we ought to include the state along with legal action. Thank you.
And the thing I would address back to that, and I'll speak with, when it comes to town attorney things, I'll speak with the mayor after the meeting here. But it's my understanding that in these types of things, of damages and types of things have to be, we'd be suing them to comply with the contract. And suing them to comply with the contract means that the work is then completed and things like that. General dissatisfaction with them, I'm not sure if that is something that you can actually take legal action on. Again, I'm not an attorney, but my point is the purpose of any legal action would be to make ONG comply. If in fact they do finish the remaining punch list items within the next month, I'm not exactly sure where that would stand. But again, the state, like you said, they haven't paid. I want to emphasize that they're supposed to pay up to 62.86%. We haven't seen that yet, and we won't see that for quite a while. But
so Steve, none of us here are attorneys. I don't think. Is anybody here an attorney? Shouldn't say that. Okay, so what my recommendation is going to be is to get the key folks together, superintendent, the mayor, Steve, Mr. Donaldson, and if the chair of the Board of Ed would like to join them, I would like to ask Mr. Washington if he would to represent me, because I'm just a city kid. I'm not a contractor or I don't have your background. You would much better be there representing me than I would be. So if you would represent the council, I would appreciate that. We'll look into legal possibility of legal action, and then you can bring that back to the council, and the council will decide what to do moving forward. So I think ultimately it's going to be a council decision. What I would like to do is to, Mr. Hartling, go ahead, and then I'll finish.
Thank you, Councilwoman Davis. I just wanted to say, with all my fire and anger about this, Steve and the whole PMBC crew, I mean, they really worked their tail off. And I think that, ONG was very lucky to have a committee that worked so hard, but was also so willing to work with the contractor. Steve did, I mean, no dispute there. I would just point out on a very base level, there's a few thousand cubic feet of concrete sidewalks at Gallup Hill School, to which we've requested for the last 2 years load tickets on, because they're palling and creating issues that could be related to them being poured after the load was expired. We know that at least one of those loads was expired because a citizen tipped off the mayor. We've been waiting for those load tickets, as an example, from our construction manager at risk for, I think, almost 2 years. So there's a very blatant example where they did not represent us fairly or accurately, and or even provide the load tickets so that we could at least make sure that we don't have thousands of linear feet that were poured after the load expired. So that's just a simple example of how they did not necessarily follow up or represent our needs. And it was the mayor tipped us off to it, and we've still been waiting on those load tickets ever since. But I did want to just say, Steve, you're a rock star, man. I'm not trying to pick on you, but this has gone so far beyond any pale. And our team, I got to tell you, my teachers went from elated about being in a building to profound frustration that, basic things couldn't happen. So thank you, Chairwoman Davis. I'm sorry for taking the mic again, and I'll stop there.
Okay, so where I was going is that the only other thing I would ask is that can we try to fill that empty PMBC spot with the Board of Ed representative? Because right now, Kate's carrying the load there, and it might be nice to have another Board of Ed member in that spot. And then what I would like to do to wrap up is to just talk a minute about the audit process, because I've been around long enough, maybe Mary's been around as long or longer, but two projects, the high school project from way long time ago, and the Gales Ferry School project, which was a long time ago, but not so long ago that we don't remember it. We lost millions of dollars on those projects because when it came time to submit for reimbursement, there was all kinds of stuff missing. We couldn't find the files. So we don't want that to happen. I mean, we don't want to lose money that way. So I know that Steve, you have an idea of what you might want to do there. I concur with you on that. We talked a little bit last night, but we have to avoid losing millions of dollars in the audit process like we have in the past.
Yeah, Linda, I'll just address that kind of quickly here. The one of the things that I get concerned about is because the state may not open an audit on this for years, and a lot of the people that are involved in the project now, certainly when I say that they might not be here, I don't mean they're going to be dead. I mean, people could retire, people could move, all kinds of things could happen. And, coupled with our change out of, if you remember, we changed out our town system where we kept some of our records recently in the last couple of years. One of the things that I'm proposing doing, I have this on the agenda for my next PMBC meeting, and I believe that the PMBC has, based on the guidance that's been given us, we have all the authority to move forward with this, but I would certainly like to take comments on this. In the end, it would be the mayor's concurrence in the end to sign the contract, but what I'm putting together is a request for proposal and qualifications for organizations that are very, very skilled at doing these type of project closeouts. This isn't about getting screws put in doors and locks fixed. This is about assembling the entire body of evidence that meets the state guidelines for the submission. And that is a forensic job of going back to every single committee meeting minute from the beginning of this project, all of the bid documents, all of the payments, every invoice for every little thing that was done on this entire project, cradle to grave. That involves documents from the architect, O&G. It involves documents from the town clerk's office, finance. It involves meeting minutes. It involves things from this, state building permit fees. It is an enormous task that is orders of magnitude beyond the scope of a volunteer committee to do, that can look at the state guidelines that are familiar with this and give us two things. One, at the end, 2 CDs or thumb drives that for each project, because they're separate, that is indexed, organized, converted, and everything the state could possibly want related to the audit. So we can hand that to them with closeout and say, here's everything you need to do the closeout. And maybe that'll shave a year or so off of the time to do this. It'll also give us a good warm fuzzy now that we have all the stuff together that we need, and we can put that all together. The second part to that is that they can do an analysis of our eligibles and ineligibles. And this is a matter of, based on their experience, what they think the state will approve for change orders and what they will not approve. And going through that so we get a better feel for what our final town portion will be, so that Marcia Hancock's can properly bond those amounts, because she can't overbond, and we'll have a basis for what she's bonding as opposed to a pretty good guess. Granted, O&G can give us that for the, and they do it already in every single change order at the top. It says eligible or ineligible, but that's the standard guideline. The state still has to weigh on that. And there are some, and I don't want to talk about what the estimated cost would be for this at this meeting, because I don't want to sway any RFP responses coming back in. but it's a big task. It's going to take several months, and it's not so much about financial audit. It's not that. It's really a big paperwork drill of getting all this stuff together, cradle to grave, for every single action, to find all the things and put it in order, index it, put it into PDF files with a all linked up together with an index that the state's got everything that they need. And I think it's the right thing to do. It could save 6 months to a year off of the time it takes to do this audit. And I think it's money well spent. And it needs to be done sooner or later anyway. So why not do it while the people that are familiar with the project are here?
And I see Mr. Donaldson nodding his head in favor. Did you have anything to add?
Yes, I ended up closing out a project in my last job that it closed out finally 2 years after I left, after 8 years after the building opened, a school, and it was a disaster trying to put paperwork 6.5 years later together. So I encourage anything we can do to get that together and in place now, so it's ready to go.
The high school project I referred to, Steve, you made mention of this, that in 2.5 years or 3 years, who will still be here. And at that time, when they were ready to put in for the reimbursement, the superintendent had left, this high school principal had left, the chair of the committee had left. We didn't have PMBC at the time. And all of the key players had left, and it was a nightmare. It was a nightmare. So I think that's an excellent idea, and I think you'll get support on that. And thank you for your comments, Mr. Donaldson. Does anyone else have anything at this time? I think we have a bit of a path moving forward. You have a meeting. When is your next meeting, Steve?
Next PMBC meeting is going to be April 12th, at which we're going to get we're going to get the next bill for Gallup Hill School, largely for work that's all, like I said, completely done. So the fact is that O&G does not pay their contractors that work for them until we pay. This is tons of work that's already been done with, there's no question it's done right. That work is done right. So we're going to make that payment most likely at the meeting of the 12th. Because something to keep in mind here is that those second and third order contractors don't get paid till we pay O&G. So you have to keep that in the back of your mind. So the contractors that have done work that we've accepted that's complete, they don't get paid till we pay O&G. That's a little different. In the company I work for, we pay our subcontractors before the government pays us. But that's not the way the construction industry works. So in some cases, these are second and third order subcontractors that haven't been paid for some of their work. So I can understand why they would be upset. But clearly there's tons of money left to take care of the things that are left here. And I feel really, really bad in a way, because when we started this project, we were told the number one complaint in that building is going to be HVAC, no matter what building you build. And we at the time we started this project, we talked about lessons learned from the Gales Ferry School that was built, with construction quality and problems down the road that the town had to deal with. And in some ways, I'm afraid that we didn't learn a lot. And listening to some of the people on this call today, it seems like every building has problems, and our particular buildings have some that we need to address, and I think we're going to.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any comments? Hearing none, I'll consider this workshop adjourned. Oh, wait, Mr. Marshall, you need to unmute yourself.
Sorry about timing at the last minute. Been having problems with my computer off and on. I just want to add that ultimately any project like this, no matter what size, the responsibility for its success comes down to one person, and that's the superintendent of the project. I've going on 33 years, been doing this, been supervisory for almost 15, and I'm responsible for my crew and their quality of work, and then I answer to the superintendent. So it comes down to that one person. The previous superintendent knew he was leaving when he took on this job. So he really didn't have the best attitude going in. I could see that in the things that he was letting it slide. If you let things slide early in the job, it just escalates as the job goes on. And I know this firsthand. I've been seeing it my entire career. So if the issues weren't addressed early in the game, it just escalates. If you can get away with this, why not get away with that? And then when the second guy came on, he wasn't aggressive enough in correcting the problems as they came up. And again, the problems just escalated. And all we hear towards the end of the job was just more and more excuses. It even got to the point where I was donating parts on my own private stash to help fix things on the school because we weren't getting simple items out of him. So ultimately, and Mayor, I would definitely go to the COG and talk poorly about this company because no contractor wants to hear their name smeared across the front page. It's a very powerful tool. It's simple and seems like playgroundish, but it's a very powerful tool. I would definitely do that. That's about it for now. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Based on all the comments, I would say that if somebody wants to make a fortune, they could write a book on how to solve HVAC problems in major buildings, because every building project I've been involved with, and there's been several in town, that's always the big issue. And it's unfortunate that they're so complicated. But that being said, I will, unless I see one more little blue hand go up, I see none, I will adjourn this work session. Thank you all for being here. And I hope that the meeting that is going to be called is done quickly so we can move on to next steps. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good
Thanks,
night.
everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Happy Easter to everyone that celebrates.
You too.